The Galactic Academy of Extraterrestrial Arts and Sciences was far more than an institution of learning. It was a hub where the most brilliant minds in the universe came together. Nestled on a planet orbiting a distant star, the Academy stood as a dazzling city of knowledge, influence, and affluence. Its crystalline skyscrapers gleamed with an iridescence that symbolized the diverse array of cultures and species thriving within its boundaries. Here, the brightest and most ambitious beings from across the galaxy converged to shape the destinies of their worlds. Each student carried the weight of high expectations, their futures seemingly etched in greatness. Yet, among these extraordinary individuals, Lena Evans stood apart. She was an outlier. The student body boasted heirs to alien empires, prodigies of intergalactic militaries, and children of renowned diplomats. But Lena was an anomaly, a human. Her species was still relatively new to the galactic stage, and her presence at the Academy highlighted just how different she was. Standing just over 5 feet tall, with striking auburn hair and vivid green eyes, Lena often felt diminutive in comparison to her towering peers. Among beings adorned with shimmering scales, glowing skin, and wings of every conceivable shape and size, her humanity seemed ordinary, even mundane. Though her upbringing as the daughter of Earth's ambassador to the United Planetary Coalition afforded her a privileged background, Lena was acutely aware of the gap separating her from her peers. Her father, Alexander Evans, wielded considerable political influence and wealth, enough to secure her a place at the Academy. But Lena had no desire to lean on his reputation. She wanted to succeed on her own terms, to be valued for her abilities rather than her connections. Yet, despite her efforts, she felt the weight of her lineage every day. The Academy prided itself on impartiality, but Lena could sense the undercurrent of bias. Humans were still seen by many of the older and more established species as a lesser, inexperienced race. Even with her stellar academic performance and sharp intellect, Lena frequently overheard hushed conversations dismissing her achievements, attributing her success to favoritism rather than skill. Her daily life at the Academy settled into a steady routine. She attended lectures, engaged in intellectual debates, and returned to her quarters to immerse herself in her studies, all while trying to ignore the stares and whispers. Her only true friend in this vast, alien world was Zerich, a member of the regal Neral species. His noble demeanor and eyes that shifted colors to reflect his emotions made him stand out as much as his unwavering loyalty. Zerich was fascinated by human culture, a curiosity that often left him both intrigued and perplexed. He frequently stepped in to defend Lena from subtle jabs and thinly veiled insults, though she herself chose to remain silent, preferring to focus her energy on her work. One quiet afternoon, Lena found herself tucked away in the Academy's sprawling library, surrounded by holographic research files. She was completely absorbed in her latest project, an ambitious analysis of interspecies diplomatic strategies. It was a subject close to her heart, one she hoped could help bridge the divides she often felt so deeply. Her focus shattered as a sudden, curt notification flashed on her personal communication device. Lena Evans, report to the Academy Administration Office immediately. The message was brief and formal, offering no further explanation. A tight knot formed in Lena's stomach. Rarely had she been summoned to the administration office, and the abruptness of the call only deepened her unease. Carefully, she packed away her materials, straightened her uniform, a sleek silver ensemble tailored to meet the Academy's exacting standards, and began the walk to the administration tower. The journey felt unusually long. The Academy's sprawling hallways, adorned with intricate murals chronicling the histories of countless worlds, seemed to loom over her, amplifying her apprehension. As she walked, curious glances followed her every step. Some of her peers paused to whisper, their voices too faint to discern but their intent clear. News traveled fast in the Academy, and her presence near the administration wing was sure to spark speculation. She squared her shoulders, trying to ignore the weight of their stares, and focused on reaching her destination. The administration office was an imposing space. Its walls, composed of what appeared to be shimmering liquid metal, shifted colors fluidly, giving the room a surreal and unsteady feel. Waiting for her inside was Head Administrator Thors. He was a Drexen, his tall, slender frame accentuated by a crown of frilled tendrils that swayed lightly as she entered. Known for his rigid adherence to rules, Thors was both feared and respected by the student body, his authority unquestioned. "Miss Evans, take a seat," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. His piercing yellow eyes narrowed as he gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Lena hesitated, her heart pounding, but she complied, sitting carefully and folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Without any preamble, Thors began, his tone as cold as ever. "Miss Evans, after reviewing your performance and behavior over the past semester, the administration has determined that you do not meet meet the standards expected of our students." The statement hit her like a physical blow, leaving her momentarily stunned. Her mind raced to comprehend his words, struggling to piece together the meaning behind them. "Sir, I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Thors leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "It has become evident that you lack the adaptability required to thrive in this environment. Your human perspective is fundamentally incompatible with the intergalactic standards we uphold. Therefore, we believe it would be in the best interest of the Academy and yourself to terminate your enrollment." Lena's pulse quickened, her initial confusion giving way to a torrent of disbelief and anger. She fought to keep her voice steady. "With all due respect, Administrator Thors, I have consistently performed at the top of my class in all subjects. I followed every Academy rule and contributed meaningfully to our collaborative projects. On what grounds are you expelling me?" Thors' expression remained resolute, his voice unflinching. "While your academic record may be adequate, it is insufficient. This institution values unity and a shared cultural framework that transcends individual backgrounds. Your human nature, I'm afraid, prevents you from fully integrating into our community." A cold rage began to settle over Lena. She had poured every ounce of effort into proving herself, going above and beyond what was expected. To hear her humanity, a trait beyond her control, used as justification for her expulsion was both infuriating and deeply hurtful. Yet, she knew better than to let her emotions show. Here's a completely rephrased version of the text, with every line reworked. Hearing that her very nature, something she had no control over, was the reason for her dismissal was a crushing blow. The injustice stung, but Lena knew better than to let her emotions betray her. "So, that's the conclusion, then," she said evenly, her voice composed while her gaze burned with defiance. "I'm being dismissed because I'm human." Administrator Thors' tendrils coiled in an unmistakable display of irritation. "Miss Evans, the decision is final. You are to vacate your quarters within 24 hours. Arrangements have already been made for your transport back to Earth." Lena exhaled slowly, keeping her frustration in check. Protesting further would be pointless. Thors had made his position clear, and the Academy's administration would undoubtedly support him. Rising from her chair, she locked eyes with him, her expression unyielding. "Thank you for your time, Administrator," she said with a steady voice that betrayed none of the storm within. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and left his office, her posture unbroken despite the weight of humiliation pressing down on her. As she walked through the pristine corridors of the administration wing, her thoughts churned. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her expulsion had nothing to do with her abilities or conduct. The decision was purely rooted in the Academy's deep-seated prejudice against humans. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such bias, but it was the harshest blow she'd ever endured. Back in her quarters, she found Zerich waiting for her. His bioluminescent eyes shifted to a muted blue, a color that signified sorrow in his species. "Lena, what happened?" he asked gently, his tone laced with concern. She forced a small, unconvincing smile. "They've expelled me," she said, her voice hollow. "Apparently, I don't meet the Academy's standards." Zerich's eyes darkened to a fiery red, his species' expression of rage. "That's absurd. You've worked twice as hard as most of the students here. This isn't about standards. They're punishing you because you're human." Lena shrugged, feigning indifference. "It doesn't matter. I'll be gone tomorrow," she replied, though her calm exterior concealed the fire building within her. Anger simmered, not from spite but from the unshakable conviction that her humanity was not a flaw but a strength. As she started packing her belongings, her thoughts turned to her father. He had sacrificed so much to give her the opportunity to attend the Academy, and she had kept her struggles to herself, determined to handle them alone. Now, as she faced an uncertain future, she wondered if she should finally tell him the truth. The sun dipped behind the Academy's gleaming spires, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Lena stood by her window, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let prejudice dictate her future. She had earned her place here, and she would prove them all wrong. What the Academy didn't realize was that Lena Evans wasn't just an ordinary student. She was the daughter of one of their most influential benefactors, a revelation that would soon send shockwaves through their hallowed halls. Word of Lena's expulsion spread like wildfire through the Galactic Academy. The corridors buzzed with speculation as students from every corner of the galaxy whispered and exchanged knowing glances. For many, she had always been an outsider, an anomaly at best, an intruder at worst. Lena walked through the dormitory halls, her steps heavy with disbelief, anger, and an ache she couldn't name. To her, the Academy had been more than a prestigious institution. It was a symbol of hope, a place where humanity could finally stand shoulder to shoulder with the galaxy's most powerful species. She had endured broke prejudice with quiet determination, believing that her dedication and talent would carve her a rightful place among them. Now all of that felt shattered. Her expulsion wasn't just a personal blow. It felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked toward. Most of her peers, oblivious to the true weight of her departure, merely shrugged and moved on, their indifference cutting deeper than outright disdain. Lena had no choice but to leave, but the universe, it seemed, had different plans for her. Zerich, however, refused to let this injustice stand. As a Nerl with an unshakable sense of fairness and fierce loyalty, he couldn't sit by and watch his closest friend be cast aside. The kaleidoscopic hues of his eyes shifted to an intense amber, a sign of his resolve. He was certain Lena's expulsion wasn't about her abilities, but her humanity, and he intended to prove it. Zerich's family had deep ties within the Academy's administrative ranks, granting him access to information that others could only dream of. Leveraging his training in strategic intelligence and a few well-practiced security bypass techniques, he made his way into the Academy's digital archives. The search began with Lena's records, her academic achievements, behavioral evaluations, and contributions to the Academy. What he found only deepened his frustration. Lena was ranked among the top students in her class. Her research in interspecies relations had been groundbreaking, earning her commendations from several departments. There wasn't a single blemish on her record. As Zerich scrolled through the data, the colors of his eyes darkened to a smoldering crimson, a visual manifestation of his rising fury. If her performance wasn't the issue, then what was? Determined to find answers, Zerich turned his focus to the decision-making process that led to her expulsion. His sharp claws danced over the holographic interface as he unearthed an internal memo recently added to the system. His throat tightened as he read phrases like failure to fully assimilate, cultural incompatibility, and disruptive human influence. The phrase disruptive human influence felt like a slap across his face. It was clear now, Lena wasn't removed because of any failing on her part, but because she was human. The Academy's leadership had deemed her unworthy of their so-called ideals. Just as Zerich prepared to log out of the system, a file labeled Patron Relations caught his eye. Clicking on it, he unearthed a list of influential donors whose financial contributions kept the Academy afloat. At the very top of that list, bolded and impossible to miss, was a name that made him freeze: Alexander Evans, Lena's father. For a moment, Zerich sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. Whatever this revelation meant, one thing was certain: this fight was far from over. Zerich had always known that Lena's family was steeped in diplomacy, but the revelation that her father was one of the Academy's key benefactors left him momentarily speechless. It explained so much: her quiet humility, her refusal to trade on her family name, and her determination to earn respect purely through her own efforts. Lena had never wanted special treatment, but if the Academy had dismissed her based solely on her humanity, then perhaps it was time to wield her lineage as a weapon to claim the recognition she rightfully deserved. Without delay, Zerich collected the data he had uncovered and made his way to Lena's dormitory. Inside her room, Lena was packing her belongings with slow, deliberate movements. The sting of her expulsion weighed heavily on her. Each item she folded a reminder of the home she had built at the Academy. Her mind replayed her final meeting with Administrator Thors, the cold dismissal that had shattered her hopes. She had worked tirelessly to prove she was more than just the human, but in the end, they had reduced her to nothing else. A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. She opened it to find Zerich standing there, his breathing labored and his kaleidoscopic eyes swirling with an urgency she hadn't seen before. "Zerich, what's going on?" she asked, her brow furrowing in concern. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He shut the door firmly behind him and turned to face her, his expression a mixture of anger and determination. "Talk about what?" Lena asked, her confusion deepening. "I looked into the Academy's records," Zerich began, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "Your expulsion has nothing to do with your performance or behavior. You've done everything right. Lena, this is about one thing. They expelled you because you're human." Lena's hands tightened into fists, the frustration and grief she'd been holding back bubbling to the surface. "I knew it," she said bitterly. "I tried so hard to prove I belonged here, but it was never enough. They never wanted me." "There's more," Zerich said, his tone dropping, as though he was preparing her for a blow. "Your father, Alexander Evans, is one of the Academy's biggest financial supporters. His contributions keep this place running. The administrators didn't factor that in when they made their decision. If we confront them with this, they'll have to reconsider." Lena stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had known her father's influence was substantial, but she hadn't realized just how deeply it extended into the Academy. For years, she had worked to prove herself without leaning on her family's reputation or wealth. It was a point of pride for her. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about righting a grave injustice. "What do you suggest we do?" Lena asked, her voice tinged with determination that hadn't been there moments ago. "We confront them," Zerich said firmly. "We demand they overturn their decision. If they refuse, we remind them exactly who your father is and what his support means to this academy. They can't afford to lose him." Lena drew a deep breath, her thoughts racing. She had spent so long trying to stay in the background, to avoid drawing attention to herself or her family. But Zerich was right. If she didn't stand her ground now, not only would her own future be lost, but the academy's prejudice against humanity would go unchallenged. Her expression hardened as resolve settled over her. "Then let's make them listen," she said, her voice steady. Zerich nodded, his crimson-tinted eyes gleaming with approval. "Together," he said, "we'll make this right." Lena and Zerich left her quarters, their steps purposeful as they made their way to the administration tower. Lena's heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her expression composed, projecting an air of calm determination. Around them, students paused mid-conversation, their gazes tracking the pair as they walked by. Whispers filled the hallways, curiosity mounting. Lena ignored the murmurs, focusing solely on what needed to be done. When they entered the administration office, Administrator Thors looked up from his desk. His frilled tendrils twitched, an outward display of his irritation. "Miss Evans," he said in a tone as cold as the room itself, "I believe my instructions were clear. You are no longer a student of this academy." Lena met his gaze without hesitation. "Administrator Thors, I know the real reason behind my expulsion. It has nothing to do with my performance or behavior. You expelled me simply because I'm human." Thors' expression remained carefully neutral, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his eyes. "This institution values harmony and cohesion," he replied smoothly. "Your presence has disrupted both." "Disrupted?" Zerich interjected, his voice laced with anger. "What you mean is that your own prejudice against humans doesn't align with the Academy's so-called values. You fear anything that challenges your narrow ideals of what a model student should look like." Thors' tendrils twitched again, this time more sharply. "Zerich, I advise you to tread carefully. This matter is settled, and our decision stands." Lena took a steadying breath, knowing it was time to unveil her strongest card. "Administrator Thors, you're fully aware of my father's contributions to this academy. Alexander Evans is your primary benefactor. His funding has made your expansions and research initiatives possible. If you insist on my expulsion, I will inform him of your decision and leave the consequences in his hands." Thors' eyes widened slightly, the faintest crack in his usual composure. It was clear he hadn't anticipated this. His gaze shifted uneasily between Lena and Zerich, as if searching for a way to regain control of the situation. "Miss Evans," Thors began, his tone now more measured, "perhaps we were too hasty in our decision. Your presence at the academy is unique, and it's possible we failed to give you adequate opportunities to integrate. We can certainly revisit the matter." Lena's jaw tightened. She could see through his attempt at appeasement. This wasn't genuine remorse. It was fear of losing the financial lifeline her father represented. Yet, she also understood that refusing his offer outright might close the door for future human students who deserved a chance. "I will return," Lena said, her voice unwavering, "but only on the condition that I am not treated as a token human or an outsider. Humans deserve a place here just as much as any other species. I want the academy to acknowledge that we're not inferior simply because we're different." Thors hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. His tendrils were tense, betraying his displeasure even as he forced out the words, "Of course, Miss Evans. We will ensure that necessary adjustments are made." Without another word, Lena and Zerich turned and left the office, leaving Administrator Thors sitting behind his desk, visibly unsettled. As they stepped into the hallway, Lena felt a small spark of hope reignite within her. This was just the beginning, but it was a step forward, not only for her but for everyone who would come after. As Lena and Zerich stepped back into the hallway, the tension of their confrontation lingered in the air, but beneath it was a quiet sense of victory. For the first time in weeks, Lena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had stood her ground, not just for herself, but for humanity's right to exist and thrive among the galaxy's most influential beings. The journey ahead, however, would not be easy. Lena knew that returning to her studies didn't mean she would be accepted by her peers or even fully respected by the administration. If anything, the challenges she faced would only grow. But deep within, a renewed sense of purpose took root. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a trailblazer, forging a path for others like her. Back in her quarters, Lena paused, letting the stillness of the room wash over her. Everything looked the same, yet it all all felt different. The space, adorned with small mementos from Earth, a framed photo of her family, a smooth river stone from her favorite hiking spot, felt more like a haven than ever before. It was here she would gather her strength, plan her next steps, and prepare to face the academy once again. The next morning, Lena walked into her first class as if nothing had happened. The stares started immediately. Some students watched her with quiet respect, their eyes lingering in admiration. Others barely hid their resentment, their gazes sharp with unspoken judgment. Whispers followed her wherever she went, but Lena focused on the reason she had come here: to learn, to grow, and to prove humanity's worth. Zerich stayed by her side, his presence a steadying force. Between classes, they exchanged quiet words, their conversations brief but filled with mutual understanding. Zerich's kaleidoscopic eyes often shifted to hues of concern and protectiveness when he glanced at her. Lena could see the burden he carried, having defied his own culture to stand by her. She felt a deep gratitude for his unwavering loyalty, knowing that without him, she might not have made it this far. In the days that followed, word of Lena's confrontation with the administration spread across the campus like wildfire. Her peers whispered in hushed tones about the human who had dared to challenge the system, and won. While not everyone admired her, her story carried an undeniable weight. Few had ever stood up to the Academy's rigid hierarchy, let alone someone from a species many regarded as inferior. Lena's defiance was becoming a legend in its own right. As she walked through the halls, head held high, Lena couldn't help but feel the gravity of her position. She had become more than just a student. She was a symbol of resilience, a living reminder that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. While the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, Lena was ready to take it on. For herself, for humanity, and for the future she believed in.